For most of human history, we've relied on other people to manage the things we care about. We trust banks with our money, governments with our records, and giant corporations with our data. For a long time, this system, while imperfect, worked. But then, an idea appeared from the corners of the internet, an idea that challenged everything we thought we knew about trust. That idea was blockchain. It didn't arrive with a big corporate announcement. It showed up quietly in 2008 in a white paper from a mysterious figure named Satoshi Nakamoto. This paper introduced Bitcoin, a digital currency that didn't need a bank or a government. It ran on a shared public ledger where thousands of computers worked together to verify every transaction. That ledger was the first blockchain. So what is a blockchain? Think of it as a special kind of database, but instead of one person or company controlling it, everyone on the network has a copy. And once you add information to it, it's almost impossible to change or delete. Every new piece of information, or block, is cryptographically linked to the one before it, creating a secure, transparent chain of history. The promise was radical. Trust, without needing a middleman. This was a bombshell. If you could build trust directly into code, what couldn't you change? Suddenly, banks seemed optional. Contracts could enforce themselves. Records could be made tamper-proof and available to everyone. Blockchain wasn't just a technology anymore. It was a movement. A statement about decentralization, autonomy, and freedom from the old powers. As Bitcoin's fame grew, people started asking, if blockchain can secure money, what else can it secure? And the answer, it seemed, was everything. Supply chains, voting, real estate, healthcare records, art, even social media, all were being reimagined on the blockchain. The hype was deafening. Money poured into startups, and conferences were filled with predictions of a decentralized future. This was the beginning of the great blockchain hype cycle. During this time, blockchain was often sold as a destiny, not just a tool. Headlines called it the next internet. Companies would announce blockchain projects just to sound innovative, often without a clear plan. For believers, this was the revolution we'd all been waiting for, a fix for the centralized systems that had let us down time and time again. But for skeptics, it started to look like a solution desperately searching for a problem. And you know what? That skepticism wasn't totally out of line. Beyond Bitcoin and a few other cryptocurrencies, many of these grand blockchain projects struggled to get off the ground. They were slow. They were complicated for the average person to use. And the energy consumption of some systems, like Bitcoin's, raised serious environmental alarms. Critics pointed out that for many of these so-called revolutionary ideas, a simple, traditional database would have been faster, cheaper, and easier to build. This brings us to the big question that still follows blockchain everywhere it goes. Is this a genuine solution to real-world problems, or is it just an over-engineered piece of tech trying to justify its own existence? To find the answer, we have to go back to the core issue blockchain was designed to solve: trust. Specifically, how do you get people who don't know or trust each other to agree on something without a central authority? In our world, we use intermediaries, banks, governments, notaries to solve this. But these intermediaries can be hacked, they can be biased, or they can simply make mistakes. Blockchain offers a different path. Instead of trusting an institution, you trust math and a network of independent computers. The rules are open for everyone to see. The history is public. In theory, no single person can cheat the system. This is incredibly appealing in places where institutions are weak or untrustworthy. But here's the catch. Not every problem is a trust problem, and not every trust problem needs a decentralized solution. This is where the debate gets interesting. Critics argue that blockchain is often used where trust already exists, or where a central authority is actually more efficient. In those cases, blockchain doesn't simplify things, it just makes them more complicated. Supporters have a strong counterargument, though. They say we're still in the dial-up era of blockchain. They compare it to the internet in the 1990s, slow, clunky, and dismissed by many as a fad. Nobody using a 56K modem could have predicted Netflix or cloud computing. In the same way, today's blockchain experiments might just be a tiny glimpse of what has to come as the technology matures. Both sides have a point, which is why this question is so hard to answer. Blockchain isn't just about code and computers. It's tied to powerful ideas about who holds power, who has access, and who gets to make the rules. That's why discussions about it get so heated. For some, criticizing blockchain is like defending a broken system. For others, embracing it feels like ignoring practical reality. So as we move forward, it's clear that calling blockchain a miracle or a gimmick is way too simple. The real story, like with most game-changing technologies, is somewhere in the middle. To really understand where blockchain adds value, we need to look past the promises and focus on what's actually being built. We have to separate the real successes from the failed experiments and the genuine innovation from the marketing hype. In our next video, we're going to do just that. We'll step away from the abstract debates and dive into the concrete, real-world examples where blockchain is already making an impact. By looking at actual use cases and measurable results, we can finally start to get a clear answer to that one big question. Is blockchain living up to its promise? Or is it still searching for its purpose? Remember the early days of blockchain? All that hype, the wild headlines, and let's be honest, a lot of skepticism. It felt like a technology trapped in conference rooms and complicated white papers. But while everyone was distracted by price charts and speculation, something quieter was happening. Blockchain started to leave the theoretical world and find its footing in reality. This isn't a story about a magic bullet or a massive failure. It's about a tool that, under the right conditions, actually works. To really get it, we need to look at where it's already making a difference. The most famous example, of course, is digital money. Love it or hate it, Bitcoin showed us something new. A global payment system that runs 24/7 without a single company or government in charge. Now, if you live in a place with a stable bank, that might not sound like a big deal. But for people dealing with hyperinflation or strict financial controls, this wasn't just some cool tech experiment. It was a lifeline. Blockchain didn't replace a good system. It filled a void where trust was already gone. But it didn't stop with Bitcoin. The real game changer for many was the rise of what's called DeFi, or decentralized finance. Think about all the things you do with a bank: lending, borrowing, earning interest. Traditionally, these are walled gardens. You need the right credit score, the right documents, and you need to be in the right country. DeFi took those services and turned them into open-source code running on blockchains like Ethereum. Suddenly, anyone with an internet connection could participate. No permission needed. This wasn't just a technical upgrade. It was about access. In places where banking is a luxury, DeFi offered a new way to join the financial world. The rules were written in code for everyone to see, and transactions were transparent. Sure, there are still risks, especially with security and those wild price swings, but the core idea was proven. You can coordinate complex finance without a central boss. And at the heart of this revolution are smart contracts. This is one of blockchain's most powerful ideas. A smart contract is basically just a self-executing agreement. The terms are written directly into code, and it runs automatically. Once it's on the blockchain, it does what it's programmed to do, no questions asked. This cuts out the middleman, slashes administrative costs, and avoids a lot of arguments over what the contract actually meant. Think about industries with lots of repetitive, rule-based agreements, like insurance claims or royalty payments for artists. Smart contracts are perfect for this. An insurance payout can be triggered instantly when a flight is delayed, for example. The record is permanent and easy to audit. Smart contracts aren't for every situation, especially ones that need human judgment. But where automation and transparency are key, they're a clear winner. Now let's switch gears to something you can physically touch: supply chains. Modern supply chains are a mess. They're huge, complex, and you often have no idea where your stuff really came from. A product can pass through dozens of hands across multiple countries. This makes it easy for fraud, fake goods, and safety risks to creep in, especially with food, medicine, and luxury items. Who can you trust? Blockchain offers a solution by creating a shared, unchangeable digital ledger of a product's entire journey. Every single step from the farm to the store shelf can be recorded and verified by everyone involved. When it's done right, a company or even you, the customer, can scan a code and trace a product right back to its origin. Blockchain doesn't replace the trucks and ships, but it adds a layer of trust, a single source of truth that no one can secretly change. Healthcare is another area where blockchain is showing promise, though it's moving more carefully. Our medical data is one of the most sensitive things we have. Yet it's scattered across different hospitals and clinics, and we have very little control over it. Some innovative projects are using blockchain not to store the data itself, but to manage who can access it. Think of it as a super secure logbook. This way, patients can grant permission to doctors, and there's an unbreakable record of who saw what and when. It puts control back in the hands of the patient while keeping the information secure. What connects all these examples? It's not just about using a fancy new technology. In every case, blockchain is solving a very specific problem of coordination. You have multiple groups that need to share information, but they don't fully trust each other. Blockchain acts as that neutral, transparent referee where the rules are clear and enforcement is automatic. And then there's the less tangible but equally important idea of digital ownership. In the digital world, anything can be copied with a click. Scarcity is hard to create. Blockchain-based tokens like NFTs introduced a way to prove you own a digital item, whether it's a piece of art, an in-game sword, or a collectible. This allows creators and users to buy and sell digital value directly, without needing a big platform to act as the gatekeeper. Yes, the space got flooded with speculation and the debate got heated. But underneath all that noise was a solution to a real problem. How do you truly own something that only exists as code? It's crucial to understand, though, that blockchain isn't a silver bullet. It works best under specific conditions. You need multiple independent parties involved. Trust between them needs to be low or expensive to build. And the need for transparency has to outweigh the need for pure speed. When you have those ingredients, blockchain can do things that traditional databases just can't, and that's exactly why blockchain hasn't replaced everything. For many tasks, a simple, centralized database is faster, cheaper, and more efficient. A well-run company doesn't need a decentralized ledger to manage its own internal data. Blockchain doesn't compete by being a better database. It competes by being a fundamentally different kind of system. Understanding that difference explains why its adoption has seemed so patchy. It thrives on the fringes, in the places where existing systems are broken or exclusionary. It struggles to gain traction where things already work just fine. And that doesn't make it a failure, it simply defines its role. As the technology has matured, the conversation has shifted. The question is no longer, can blockchain change the world? But are we using it for the right problems? For every success story, there are dozens of projects that just added complexity for no good reason. That contrast has sharpened the critique that blockchain is sometimes a solution in search of a problem. So to get the full picture, we have to look at the other side of the coin. We need to confront the limitations, the failures, and the uncomfortable truths that have fueled the skepticism. Only by understanding where blockchain falls short can we truly know if its successes are the start of a real transformation or just a few lucky exceptions. In our next video, we'll dive into those criticisms. We'll explore the constraints and the challenges that have made many people wonder if blockchain is still just a technology searching for its true purpose. For all the incredible success stories and promising applications we've discussed, blockchain has also revealed a series of weaknesses that simply cannot be ignored. As the technology moved from theory into the real world, the gap between its lofty ideals and its practical realities became wider and more visible. This is where much of the skepticism around blockchain comes from, and it's just where the argument that blockchain is a technology searching for a problem finds its strongest evidence. One of the most persistent challenges has been scalability. Think about it. Public blockchains were designed to prioritize decentralization and security above all else. But this often comes at the expense of speed. Traditional payment networks like Visa can process thousands of transactions every single second. In contrast, many popular blockchains operate at just a tiny fraction of that capacity. When lots of people try to use the network at once, transaction fees skyrocket, confirmation times drag on, and the whole user experience just falls apart. For everyday use, like buying a coffee, this friction completely undermines blockchain's promise of efficiency. Naturally, brilliant minds have been working to solve this scalability problem. This has led to increasingly complex solutions, like Layer 2 networks, sidechains, and new types of consensus mechanisms. And while these innovations are genuine signs of progress, they also introduce new trade-offs. More complexity means a higher risk of something going wrong. It creates new points of trust, which is ironic for a trustless technology. And it makes these systems even harder for non-experts to understand. In the race to scale, blockchain sometimes starts to lose the very simplicity that made it so appealing in the first place. Then there's security. It's supposed to be another pillar of blockchain's reputation, but it's proven to be more fragile than many expected. While the core cryptography of major blockchains is incredibly robust, the systems built on top of them are not. Smart contracts are a perfect example. Once a smart contract is launched, it's extremely difficult to change. A single error in the code, a tiny oversight, can lead to catastrophic losses. And it has. Over the years, billions of dollars have been lost to exploits, hacks, and poorly designed protocols. These incidents really challenge the idea that trust based on code is inherently safer than trust in institutions. In our traditional financial systems, when a mistake happens, there are usually ways for humans to step in and fix it. You can reverse a fraudulent transaction. In many blockchain systems, errors are irreversible. That finality, which is great for preventing manipulation, becomes a huge liability when you desperately need some flexibility. And we can't talk about weaknesses without mentioning energy consumption. This has been a massive point of contention, especially for blockchains that use the proof-of-work model, like Bitcoin in its early days. The environmental impact of mining has drawn heavy criticism from governments, environmental groups, and the general public. While newer models are much more energy efficient, the association between blockchain and excessive energy use has left a lasting negative impression. For a technology often framed as progressive and forward-thinking, this has been a difficult contradiction to shake. Beyond all the technical limitations, blockchain has a serious usability problem. For the average person, interacting with a blockchain is just plain intimidating. You have to manage private keys, navigate confusing digital wallets, understand transaction fees, and constantly be on the lookout for scams. The learning curve is steep, and mistakes can be costly and permanent. This creates a huge barrier to adoption, which directly contradicts the narrative of financial and technological inclusion for everyone. Regulation adds another tangled layer of complexity. Blockchain is global, operating across borders without a second thought, but laws are still largely national. This mismatch creates a fog of uncertainty for businesses and users. Governments around the world have responded in wildly different ways, from cautious experimentation to outright hostility. Sometimes, regulation has protected consumers. Other times it has stifled innovation. This lack of a clear, consistent legal framework has definitely slowed down adoption and reinforced the idea that blockchain is an unstable or risky space to be in. But perhaps the most damaging factor of all has been the behavior within the ecosystem itself. The rapid rise of purely speculative projects, misleading marketing, and blatant fraud has deeply eroded public trust. Remember the ICO boom? So many projects promised revolutionary platforms that simply never materialized. Tokens were created with no sustainable economic model, designed only to be flipped for a quick profit. In far too many cases, blockchain wasn't used as a genuine solution. It was just a buzzword, a narrative used to attract investment from people who didn't want to miss out. This history fuels the argument that blockchain is often applied backwards. Instead of identifying a real-world problem and then selecting the best tool to solve it, many teams start with the answer, blockchain, and then go searching for a question to fit it. When blockchain is the starting point rather than the end result of thoughtful design, it almost inevitably leads to inefficiency and disappointment. We saw this play out clearly with enterprise adoption. Many large corporations announced splashy blockchain initiatives, only to quietly abandon them a few years later. Why? Because many of these internal blockchains, controlled by a single company or a small group, failed to deliver any meaningful benefits. Without true decentralization, they offered very little advantage over existing, well-understood databases, while adding a whole lot of extra complexity and cost. Now, all these failures don't mean that blockchain has no value. Not at all. They mean its value is conditional. Blockchain is not a general-purpose solution that you can just sprinkle on any problem to make it better. It is a highly specialized tool with very specific strengths and weaknesses. When its core principles like decentralization and immutability don't align with the problem you're trying to solve, it becomes an expensive and time-consuming distraction. So the debate, then, isn't really about whether blockchain works. It's about whether it's being used wisely. The technology challenges our long-standing ideas about control and coordination, but it also demands incredible discipline and restraint from its builders. Without clear criteria for when and why to use it, blockchain risks becoming a solution that's constantly searching for validation, rather than delivering real-world impact. As the initial hype cools down and the industry matures, a more sober, realistic conversation has finally started to take shape. The question is no longer, will blockchain change everything? The question is now, where does blockchain genuinely belong? Answering that requires us to move beyond ideology, beyond hype, and focus squarely on results. In the final part of our discussion, we'll bring all of these threads together. We will explore what a realistic future for blockchain might look like. By reconciling its incredible successes with its very real shortcomings, we can arrive at a more grounded, Balanced understanding of whether blockchain is a real solution, a misplaced ambition, or something else entirely. After years of wild hype, fiery debates, and let's be honest, a lot of disappointment, blockchain is standing at a crossroads. The initial gold rush fever has broken, the excesses have been laid bare, and all those grand, world-changing promises have been smashed against the hard wall of reality. But what's left isn't a failed technology. It is a more honest one that has been stripped of its myths and is now forced to prove its worth through actual, practical value. If we look at it clearly, blockchain is not a magic cure-all, but it's not an empty gimmick either. At its heart, it's a specific tool for a specific job. It's a coordination technology. Its real strength is allowing a group of people or companies who might not trust each other to share data, move assets, and agree on rules without needing a central boss to oversee everything. Think about situations where trust is low, where institutions are weak, or where the middlemen are charging a fortune. In those cases, blockchain presents a really compelling alternative. But when those problems don't exist, well, then it doesn't offer much of an advantage, and that's a crucial distinction. So much of the frustration around blockchain didn't come from the tech itself failing. It came from applying it in all the wrong places. We tried to use blockchain to replace systems that were already working just fine, systems that were efficient, stable, and trusted. In those situations, trying to decentralize everything just became a huge, unnecessary burden. It was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The lesson isn't that blockchain failed. It's that we completely misunderstood where and how to use it. The future of this technology isn't going to be defined by some mind-blowing technical leap. It's going to be defined by intellectual maturity, by clearer, more critical thinking. We need to stop starting with the solution, blockchain, and start with the problem. Developers, investors, everyone involved needs to ask the hard questions first. Is decentralization actually necessary here? Is the radical transparency it provides worth the trade-off in efficiency? And is making every transaction permanent a feature, or is it a massive risk for this particular use case? In a way, blockchain is just following the classic path of many transformative technologies. Think about the internet. It didn't replace every single form of communication, and it certainly didn't get rid of all intermediaries. Instead, it carved out its own niche, redefining what was possible in specific areas like e-commerce, social networking, and information sharing. Blockchain is likely heading down a similar road. It won't be the flashy, headline-grabbing revolution we were promised. Instead, it's going to become quiet, boring, invisible infrastructure. We're already starting to see this shift happen. The most meaningful blockchain applications today are the ones you probably haven't heard much about. They're embedded deep inside existing systems, not marketed as the next big thing. Decentralized finance protocols are quietly operating in the background of new financial products. Supply chains are using it to record data without any fanfare. Digital ownership is slowly evolving from pure speculation into something with real utility. In all these examples, blockchain isn't the story. It's just the mechanism that makes the story possible. It's the plumbing, not the fancy fountain. This growing maturity allows us to have a much more sensible conversation about blockchain. We don't have to be cheerleaders defending it at all costs, nor do we have to be cynics dismissing it entirely. We can look at it on a case-by-case basis. We can judge projects based on their actual results, not on some grand ideology. Some projects will succeed. In fact, most will probably fail. And that's not a weakness. That's just the messy, iterative process of innovation. It's how progress works. So the question is no longer, is blockchain a solution or is it just a technology looking for a problem? The answer is, it's both. It all depends on how you use it. When it's applied thoughtfully to the right problem, blockchain can solve things that were previously incredibly difficult or even impossible. But when it's applied indiscriminately, it just becomes a massive distraction. A complex and expensive solution to a problem that never existed in the first place, draining resources and attention from where they're really needed. Ultimately, the biggest thing blockchain does is challenge us to fundamentally rethink our relationship with trust. It forces us to ask, do we always need big institutions, banks, or governments to act as the referees for all our interactions? Or are there some forms of trust that we can actually build directly into the code of our systems? This isn't a question that technology alone can answer. It's a deep social, economic, and even philosophical question that we're all going to be grappling with for years to come. As the hype dies down and the industry finds its footing, The true legacy of blockchain might not be the specific apps it created. It might be the conversations it forced us to have. Conversations about power, about control, about transparency, and about what it means to be responsible in an increasingly digital world. And in that sense, whether it becomes ubiquitous or not, blockchain has already succeeded. And maybe that's the most honest conclusion we can come to. Blockchain doesn't need to change everything to matter. It just needs to change the right things in the right places for the right reasons.